Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this session on the promoting of higher education values. My name is Karolina Catoni. I'm working at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden, and I'm also coordinating the Swedish section of Scholars at Risk. And with me here today I have three speakers representing three different value-based projects, and I will introduce you to them shortly, but first a few words on the topic. Well, during the last 2 days, we have heard examples of increased attacks on higher education institutions, as well as on individuals. And in a time where terms like facts and truth are being questioned, the academic community has a big responsibility as providers of knowledge, scientific facts, and evidence-based information. Well, and in these turbulent times, it is important for universities to acknowledge its core values and to know what they mean and have strategies on how to use them. Yesterday in this room, we heard an experience from Laurie Rubel, a US scholar who experienced personal attacks due to a publication where the response from the university in her defense was referring to academic freedom and freedom of expression. But it's also important that those values are not used as empty phrases, but also put into practice. It is not always only what you say that matters, but also what you actually do. Well, in this session you will hear three examples on how universities can put these higher education values into real practice. So I will now introduce you to the speakers. To my right you have Crain. Crain is the Director of Research and Learning at Scholars at Risk, where she develops and manages public programming, workshops, training, publications, and other activities, including this biannual SAR Global Congress. So it's actually thanks to Lauren's hard work that we're all here today. But Lauren also coordinates the SAR working group on promoting values in international partnerships, which works with higher education sector to develop best practices related to navigating values-related challenges. And next to Lauren is Marit Egner. Marit is the institutional contact person for SAR at the University of Oslo in Norway, and a member of the SAR Norway Steering Committee, and also the project coordinator for the Academic Refuge project that she will let us know about shortly. Marit was also the chair of the EAE section for cooperation with developing countries during 2010 to 2014, and a board member in the EAE from 2014 to 2016. And last, but definitely not least, Sijbolt Noorda. He is the president of the Magna Charta Observatory and the president emeritus of the University of Amsterdam, the past president of the Association of Dutch Research Universities, and a former board member of the European University Association. Sijbolt lectures and writes on higher education issues and regularly reviews higher education institutions in the European higher education area. Well, I will now leave the floor to the three speakers. They will have time to describe their different projects, and after that we will have a moderated discussion. And after that, we will have time also for questions from the audience. So I will start to leave the floor to Sijbolt. Please.
Thank you very much for that. I still feel lots of thoughts in my head after the great speech we just had in the main auditorium, and in a way, in a great way, I think this speech was a good preparation for this session, because the strong appeal of Suzanne Beer to all of us working in universities, in colleges worldwide, is to not just talk about things and situations out there and others over there, but to look to ourselves, our own practices. There are blatant ways in which autonomy and academic freedom and other values are being endangered and at risk, but there are also very subtle ways. And the subtle ways and slow ways are often much more tricky than the blatant ways. A famous German philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche, once said, "Not when it's dangerous, it's difficult to find the truth, but when it's dull, when things seem to be all right, you often lose track and don't know where you go." I have a couple of minutes to talk about a project that I would need a day to properly present. So that is quite a challenge. The project is a project of Magna Universitatem, which is a movement that started 30 years ago. It's now encompassing 850 universities worldwide, and our main mission is to promote and protect core values for universities. And one of our activities is designing what we call the Living Values Project, which is basically an invitation to colleges and universities worldwide to engage in a process of self-reflection on what is their value base. Are we really living these values? Are we sharing them? Are we discussing them? We used to deal with these values as institutions in times of crisis, and then find that we are ill-prepared to deal with them. But we should realize they are informing our daily practices. They are informing the way we build our curriculum, the way we prioritize our research, the way we hire people, the way we support our students, the way the students build their own communities, and so on and so on and so on. It is everywhere in the work of a university or a college. So what I will do at high speed is answer these three questions. Why are we doing this? What are we hoping to accomplish? And how will it be done? We are doing this because values are important for universities. There's lots of uncertainties in the world we work in. There's an increasing diversity in societies and on campus, reflecting a variety of cultures and values. And values are, at the end of the day, guiding the development of a university and the future they want. And when we talk about values, it is a long list. It's autonomy, it's academic freedom, it's equity, it's integrity, but also many other things: education towards global citizenship, national unity, social responsibility, and so on and so on. And one has to define those values when you work on them in the university, and one has to define what are the fundamental enabling values, like we did in the Magna Carta Universitatem 30 years ago, saying that the university is an autonomous institution, setting its own laws, that research and teaching must be morally and intellectually independent of all political authority, in the interest of our responsibility towards society. What are we trying to accomplish? We are trying to accomplish universities that are much better equipped to really respond to the main reasons why universities and colleges are there to begin with. For instance, educating students, doing research in the interest of the famous 17 Sustainable Development Goals. When we have meetings worldwide of the community of those 17 Sustainable Development Goals, we often find out that universities struggle to realign their activities. It is seen as something extra that they take upon their shoulders. But basically, it's a complete rethinking of the university required when we want to contribute to those. And using those values encompasses all elements of university and college practice. It's in governance and leadership, it's in our relations to stakeholders, it's in our internal governments, it is the value for internal leadership in practice, it is about constructing the curriculum and our teaching methodology, it is about the effective engagement with staff and the effective engagement and empowerment of students in our communities. So it's not just about a Sunday morning debate in a university about how good we should be. It is about everything we do and asking why we do it, which values are driving it. So what, last question, are we proposing to do? And we are in the process of testing it already. Our purpose is to enable universities to review their values and the extent to which they are actually living and practicing them, to evaluate where reforms are desirable and to aid the implementation of reforms wherever needed. We started this 2 years ago, preparing a draft. We are now piloting it with 10 universities worldwide, ranging from Mauritius to Brazil, from Russia to Wales, 10 very different institutions, testing whether it works. We are now revising the draft instrument and we will launch the definite format of it in our Salamanca meeting in September 18. It is the deep intent to work on this self-evaluation not as desk work in a university, not have the Department of Quality Assurance do this, but do this on the basis of a deep and full engagement of all grassroots in the university, with staff, with students, with outside stakeholders, to make it a common enterprise. So at the end of the process, you know where you stand as a community. We start out and we offer a couple of diagnostic and survey questions that will help universities to start this project. And at the end of the day, it is hoped that it will help the universities to define their own DNA, to guide their development, to enrich not just the leadership of the university, but also build trust with stakeholders and help select the right staff and help to empower and give students the central role they deserve in any college and a community. That's our purpose, that's our hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sijbolt. We are very much looking forward to hearing the results of this pilot program as well. So now I'll leave the word to Marit, who will present her the Academic Refuge project.
Okay, thank you for inviting me to this panel. As Sijbolt said, the plenary was really gearing up to what we're discussing here, and then we heard about what can be done on the institutional level. And in the Academic Refuge project, we will talk a bit about how we can also involve people even further. So the Academic Refuge project is a European project financed through the Erasmus Plus program. This is the long and horrible full title, which I want to read. And the partners, we always just call it Academic Refuge project, which is more easy. The partners are the University of Oslo, from where I come, and the UNICA network of universities and capitals of Europe, the Scholars at Risk network, and the University of Ljubljana. We also have associate partners, the EUA and the EAIE, and they are helping us with the information and also sharing resources between the networks. The funding comes from the Erasmus Plus strategic partnership. It's a 3-year project, and we're now in almost halfway through the year 2. The goals of the project are twofold. It's to improve the capacity of European universities to assist refugees and threatened academics on the one side, and then to promote greater respect for academic freedom and greater protection for higher education values. And why do we have these two goals in the same project? We think this is because the two are connected. Within the first goal, we think that what we do to assist refugees can gain from what we have already learned through working with Scholars at Risk, for example. And also we think that working on the values of the university gets clearer through the work that we do in the Goal 1, and it can also influence and improve how we work to welcome refugees and scholars. I will not talk so much about the Goal 1 here. Those who are really interested in that should have been in the other lecture hall where my colleague Anna is talking about the project from that side. I just want to say the photo we have up there, the guy with the academic freedom scarf, that's the former Minister of Higher Education, or former Minister of Knowledge actually, in Norway. So we're really trying to involve different stakeholders in the project. So these are the main activities. In 2017 we were concentrating mainly on how to welcome refugees and scholars at risk to our campuses, but also working on producing curriculum for workshops on values, and I think Lauren will talk more about that when she's talking about other things as well. We had a staff training last year. This year our main output is a MOOC on academic freedom and higher education values. And then I have to say, how many in the room has ever taken a MOOC, a massive open online course? Hands up? A few, but not all. So a MOOC, I will say a little bit more about what it is, but it is an online course where the participants are not just looking at something or reading something or listening, they're also participating actively. So it's a very important part of the course is that it's interactive, that we want to have a lot of discussions, there are polls where you can see how your responses are compared to the others, etc. And then in the third year, we will make a publication which will be an electronic handbook on putting higher education values into practice, and there we will try to invite different groups or networks working on this. So, for example, an invitation will probably come to the Magna Charta as well. And we have one event every year. So this year we will have a seminar in Ljubljana. There are invitations outside the room. So the MOOC. This is the course page on the Future Learn platform. That's where the Future Learn platform is a platform for doing this kind of online courses, and that's where we find the course itself. I have tried to include the trailer for the course into my presentation, and now we'll see if that works. So I will... No. So I'll go back and I will try the other way. Yeah. Can I click on this? Ah, there it was. Full screen, and then scroll down. More up? Yeah, this one. I'll have this one. Very sensitive. Okay, and then we need it in full screen as well. Full screen.
Did you ever have a question that you wanted to ask, but didn't because you were afraid of what might happen? Because you might be laughed at? Because someone might get angry?
Scholars and students around the world ask questions. Questions about the environment, questions about health, questions about poverty and development, questions about justice, questions about truth. And the answers to those questions affect all of society.
But sometimes asking questions can be dangerous.
Academic freedom protects the right to ask sensitive, even dangerous questions. Not just scholars' questions, but the freedom for you to think and ask questions that really matter.
In this course, we'll ask what academic freedom is and why it matters not only to scholars, but to all of us. We will talk about how you can promote academic freedom, and we want to know what are your dangerous questions.
presentation. There we go. Fine. So this was just a trailer, and as you see, we are using Rob Quinn from Scholars at Risk as one of the course facilitators. Educators, yeah, one of the educators, and Olga, who is also here this week as the other educator. And this is the trailer. We have many different. There is a mix between lectures that are video lectures filmed. There is text. There are polls. There are many different types of activities. And the content. The course is going 3 weeks. And during those 3 weeks, we've said it will take more or less 3 hours. We're not 100% sure of the exact amount people will use on it, but it will go through 3 weeks. And in the first week, it will be very much about definitions. What do we mean by higher education values, academic freedom? Where do we draw the line between different differences, like it was said in the plenary about what is academic freedom, what is just freedom of speech, etc. Then in the second week, we'll talk about what kind of threats we see to academic freedom in different settings. And in the third week, we'll work very much on how we can contribute to promoting higher education values in your own institutions. And whereas the Magna Carta project is very much on what universities can do and how they can involve their staff, this one is something you can take even if your university didn't take that responsibility. You can still go into this course and train yourself in this area, and then you can ask for the Living Values project at your university. These are the core values that we're working on mostly in the course. Academic freedom is getting more attention than the others, but of course all these values are very important and they interrelate. So sometimes you might have to think, what do I need to do to take care of the social responsibility? Is that the same as I can do in academic freedom? And we will have a lot of discussions on all these kind of dilemmas and challenging questions. What is happening in the next few months? We just got out this trailer and the registration for the MOOC has opened. It starts 4th of June. That's when we open the course itself. And then you will, of course, all already be registered and you will start doing the course together. And we think there could be new people who didn't think about this before, but it's also good to have people who already thought about this because there's a lot of possibility to give input to other participants as well. And then we'll have an event in Ljubljana, 13th of June, and there we want to bring particular attention to the situation in this region of Europe. So among the speakers there will be people from Slovenia and also from neighboring countries, etc. But you're of course all invited, and invitations outside. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marit. Very interesting, and we will discuss it further on as well. It puts a lot of pressure on the institutions to look into all these questions. So, Lauren, the floor is yours.
Sorry, I'm multitasking a little bit this week. And I just forgot to do something, so my colleague Emily is going to go help me out. So apologies for the delay. So I won't take up too much of your time today because I think you've heard a lot about Scholars at Risk this week and a lot about the work we do. But I just wanted to zoom out a little bit on the Values Project and share a little bit about how it fits into SAR's overall mission and share a little bit about the Promoting Higher Education Values Guide that we just published last month, and the workshop supplement. And I see several familiar faces in the audience, so I think several people will have also already heard parts of this in the workshop on Monday, but I hope that'll make the Q&A session all the more interesting. So SAR's work generally, as many of you would have heard this week, is premised on the idea that higher education values matter enormously. Higher education societies matter enormously. They're really important, critical pillars of civil society where we learn to test new information and figure out how to use reason and logic to solve arguments instead of force. So we consider it a vital, important part of civil society worth defending. And so in defending this mission, SAR's work's generally divided into 3 program areas. Our protection work, which is the individual assistance for at-risk scholars. Our advocacy work, which is our monitoring project, and our reports and publications, which help to raise the visibility of attacks on higher education communities. And then our values work, called research and learning, which is the area that I lead. And research and learning's work grows out of the understanding that in addition to some of the violent and coercive threats that scholars face in places like Turkey and Syria and Venezuela, there are other threats that are a lot more subtle, but can be just as corrosive to higher education. Pressures arising from globalization, and a lot of unintentional pressures on higher education that in the race for resources and competition sometimes don't leave a lot of room for conversation about values and what it is to be a member of the higher education community and why it's so important that we all engage in values-based activities in the sector. In this morning's plenary, we heard a little bit about the timeline of threats that people face. And so in Turkey, for example, the timeline's very advanced, and we're now working on protection activities. In places like Poland and Belarus, we're moving more towards maybe the advocacy phase, where we're trying to raise visibility of some of the threats that academics in those communities are facing. And really, our research and learning work is one step further back on the timeline, where we're working in countries where higher education communities are operating pretty successfully and with a wide degree of adherence to a lot of the values that you'll see in the presentation. But we want to make sure that those values stay in place and that people are talking about the values both on their own campuses and in their partnerships abroad. Because higher education values matter enormously. In SAR's work, we generally define our I lost my place. So a little bit of history on why we came to develop the Promoting Higher Education Values project. A few years ago, we started working on a project called the MOU project, where we decided that we really wanted to talk to universities who are engaging in these international cooperation agreements about whether they were discussing values in their partnerships. And so we talked a lot to our different primary representatives about what this might look like and started working on an MOU. We came to learn that a lot of these international partnerships have hundreds of MOUs, and then if we worked on an MOU on academic freedom, it would likely just be another piece of paper in a pile. It might not get the attention that we would like it to have in promoting these values. And worse than that, it also didn't really address the issue of values in your own campuses, which is something that we realized was an important part of the overall mission of promoting and protecting this space. So we went back to the drawing board and came up with the Promoting Higher Education Values project, which is a series of workshops, and it's a guide and a workshop supplement where through a series of small group exercises, we can work with higher education communities to build respect for core higher education values on their own campuses and again, in their partnerships. The values that we have included in the guide include academic freedom, equitable access, autonomy, social responsibility, and accountability. But really, it's not just about the list. It's about having your own list at your own institution and talking about it with everybody all the time. Included in the guide is also it's a framework for discussion around these values and how to implement them on your own campus, and also how to talk about them with your partners, especially in the instance in which a situation where a values challenge arises. Oftentimes when these values challenges arise, it's after the fact, and you're rushing to make a decision, and you're rushing to figure out what to do next, and there isn't a lot of time for thoughtful discussion. So part of the Promoting Higher Education Values Guidebook offers a strategy with different criteria you can use to assess how your institution might better be able to respond. We find that in talking to a lot of our members who face these challenges, they often immediately get confronted with two options: stay or go, And so we really, in part of the guide, have a list of options, a menu of responses that people can use to help expand the range of opportunities they have to respond. So as I said, we just finalized the guide, and I have a few copies in my bag, but there will also be passing around a sign-up sheet if you'd be interested in having a copy or to learn more about the project, or also to potentially organize a workshop at your university. And as Marit mentioned, we're also using the content to help build out the MOOC on academic freedom, Dangerous Questions, which launches next month. And there are also many other activities to get involved in helping us promote this work. So if you have any interest in learning more about it, please do contact me. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Lauren. So you have now heard three quite different, but also examples that are kind of linking to each other. And we actually, just before this session started, we changed the order of appearance in order to make it like progressive. So that's why we started with the survey, with Sijbolt, and then with the MOOC, and then Lauren, the promoting of the international partnerships. Well, linking the work with vision and policy statement into real activities is often a challenge for universities or for big institutions at all. But I would like you could you give a brief comment on that? What could actually make a difference, and how do we actually make that it happen for real, and not only to be these value-based words to stay in the policy statement? And I would also like for you to mention something about the sustainability, because it's not only about doing the survey, attending a MOOC, signing partnerships that are according to those values, but how do you make it happen continuously? Would you like to start, Sijbolt?
Well, let me just give one concrete example. When we started all this, we had a seminar at a university in Glasgow, Scotland, Glasgow Caledonian University. That university was had called itself the University of the Common Good, which is a beautiful title for a university to have, a beautiful motto. But then many people in the university, students, people in leadership positions, said, yes, it's one thing to have a motto, but are we living up to the motto? Are we really living the value of being a university of the common good? And they weren't certain about that. So they started a grassroots kind of project in the university, which was running for about 1.5 years, involving all students, staff, stakeholders in the community they served, stakeholders that were funding projects, the political environment in the city, and so on and so on. And at the end of the day, the two results they got were a complete redefinition of what the common good meant, and that was even more important, the certainty that in the future it would not just be on paper, on the walls at the inauguration sessions at the beginning of the semester or something like it, but it would be a lived value. So they were certain that from that day on they could also refer to these values when they were making their decisions, setting up new curriculums and weighing priorities, something that you have to do in a college all the time. Is this more important than that? And this is the way, they said to us, to stay away from just very managerial, very practical, economic kind of arguments making the difference. This is the way for us to make certain that we make decisions that are really informed by values that we believe in and that we want to support. And of course, you cannot do this once for all time. So you'll probably have to repeat this every 6 or 7 years, and maybe there will be a certain incident that will bring you to reiterate this, or a challenge, or a discussion. But from that simple example, in that one school, we learned that this is basically the way a college as a community, a very diverse community, can best prepare itself for its function.
Yeah, I can add that both in the workshops and in the MOOC, we are working quite much in the on how important it is to be proactive, that you have discussions about how you implement the values in practice and what kind of situations can come up. So something can be done at the leadership level, but it should also be done at all other levels, so the department, the faculty, etc. And it could be, for example, to think of if we want to invite someone, how should we make sure that academic freedom is taken care of? How do we make sure that we have equal access to education and to get all kinds of perspectives in, etc. So being proactive is what we advocate for, but we're also having both in the workshop and in the MOOC also training on how you can assess situations when they happen. And wherever in the world you are, there will be incidents, and then how can you actually look into this incident and what we would say in Norway, breathe with your stomach first, and then you can, look through it, and then you can act instead of just rushing to something that you might regret in the end.
Yeah, I think building on both of those comments, I think when you're developing a statement of values at your university, you want to make sure that you're including all stakeholders. So faculty, students, trustees, it really should be an inclusive process and a really transparent process where you're developing these statements. And I think, as Sijbolt said, it's probably something that should be revisited and reviewed on a regular basis. And more than that, it should be actively disseminated in a variety of ways. So a lot of universities, wonderfully, have statements of values on their websites, but a lot of the faculty that we have in these workshops never know about it. They're kind of hard to find, and we really encourage universities to actively promote these, put it as part of your student orientation, put it in a variety of places, and really point people towards it as a guide star, as something they can reference when they're trying to make these difficult decisions and to really know what the values of their university are.
Perfect, thank you. I just wanted to know, do you consider any of those values? You mentioned, all of you have mentioned different types of values along your presentations, but are any of these values more difficult to work with than others?
I mean, I think as far as our project's concerned, those are the values that we've identified looking at various civil society statements. But more so than the precise list of values, it's the process of identifying your own values. So yes, some values are more challenging than others, but in our project we really try not to get too stuck in the parsing out exactly what they mean and looking for exact definitions. It's more about making sure that you have a culture that supports some type of values and that you're talking about it openly on your campus.
I would, instead of saying which one is most difficult, maybe some are more taken care of already. So for example, both accountability and equitable access might already have a lot of systems in place. Of course, they still need to be discussed if they are the right one, etc. But a lot of work has already been done there. Maybe the one where you have more vague limitations or lines might be the academic freedom, but there can be so many different situations in different contexts. So I think it's good to just be quite open to re-looking at what you have already thought about.
So far we find that the priority in terms of values is very much depending on the context. So for instance, when we had a seminar on these issues, trying to identify the lines along which we should work in Malaysia, the question was, what are the main values here? And they said our first value in forming university life is contributing to national unity. And the second important one is contributing to national unity. And the third one, well, you guess. So, I mean, if you have a national context where such an overriding national unity concern is informing all of university life and threatens to override all the other issues, the issue will be how to make room and give authority to other values. while in other cases people would profess to be completely autonomous, while in fact the only one autonomous in a university was the president or the rector, and the rest of the university had to follow suit. So if the concept of autonomy is limited in the governance system of a university, it can become a very important and often tricky subject. But that very much depends on the context. So our main challenge is to stimulate colleges and universities to really be willing to engage in this in a self-critical mode and not in a window dressing mode. And we try to candidates, to signatory universities of the Magna Carta that engage in this process to sort of warn them on beforehand that if you are not going to make this a real participatory process in your institution, it will have limited impact. Then it will just be a sort of a rewriting of your strategy paper or a rewriting of your banners or your promotion material, but not really affecting your community life. And the basic impact that we hope for is that values become shared values of all of us working in the university, from students to that autonomous rector.
Lauren, you mentioned the Higher Education Values Project, and you mentioned also the strategy to assess partnerships. But many of us working in international education, we also know that it can also be a difficult or a challenge to monitor those partnerships once you have entered the partnerships. Would you like to say, is this also something that is covered within the project?
So the project generally aims to provide a framework for these discussions. So the guidebook does have a series of criteria that you can use to assess a given incident, as well as a menu of potential options your university could consider responding depending on how the criteria of a given scenario assess. But I think generally the point is that we want universities to be talking about values as they enter their partnerships, during their partnerships, and should an incident arise in their partnerships. Because I think if you wait until an incident arises to start having these conversations, time is tight, frustration is high, and you don't really have that time to build a shared vocabulary and a sense of joint mission around these values, and really pointing out that these values are what make a really productive partnership and why they're important in the partnership. It's hard to make that argument after the fact when tensions are high, and so if you're starting this conversation earlier and continuing it throughout, you're more likely to get to, not necessarily an easier outcome, but at least one where you feel like you can communicate clearly.
Well, I'd like to second that, because it's indeed very important in deep partnerships for universities to know your value base. And even when you are to disagree on that, it's much better to make that kind of a disagreement clear before you start, rather than find out the hard way when there is a crisis or a conflict. So I would not say that you should only work with partners that are exactly a value copy of yourself. I mean, the interesting side of working internationally is that you're able to work with people that are very different from yourself. But to do this in a true manner and to do it value-based correctly, I think it's very important that you embark upon such an exercise before you start, so you can refer back to that beginning once you get into a conflict or you have to make a tricky decision.
Thank you very much. So this is a big work and something that needs to be maintained. It's not just ticking a box. We would now like to open the floor to if you have any questions from the audience. We have an extra microphone that can be used. So I'm thinking that we can collect a few, maybe 2 or maybe 3 questions before we answer.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Håkon Fotland, working at UiT Architect University of Norway. Dr. Sijbolt have a quote from Nietzsche, which caught my mind about dull times. And I would like to ask whether his project, Living Values project, how does it enlighten the universities on dull times? It's easy to do the exercise when it's obvious. It's easy to do advocacy when it's obvious. How do we address the dull times? Thanks.
Do we have one more question? Yes, in the back.
Thank you so much for the speakers. It was very interesting, and we had already the panel on Monday, and everything was introduced. But let me just say what I was saying there, just to share some of my colleagues who maybe weren't with us on Monday. I would like just to highlight that this is the real ideal kind of values, which normally that's fine for all probably universities and values of which normally everybody agree upon this. But again, when we talk about realities, actually, different societies, different cultures, how we could, if we have these certain patterns and values, how we are going to apply these kind of values in different societies. Regarding the freedom of academic, I mean, there are certain taboos which we can't even reach beyond. Starting with the idea of censorship, when we talk about religion, for instance, in some societies, or we're talking about gender and some questions. I mean, there are. So I think I would like. I mean, the question is general question for the panelists. If we could comment, enlighten us how we could take these kind of I wouldn't say blueprint, but I would say it's very interesting. I would be very happy also to take some of the ideas with me in our original universities, so that at least we could say something, we can implement it on the ground. Thank you.
Okay, so the first question was to Dr. Noorda regarding the living values and the enlightenment of dull times. Would you like to start with that one, Sijbolt?
Well, what I meant by the reference to Nietzsche is that sometimes we find ourselves in a situation where we say, well, there's no problem. I mean, things are going well. If you look somewhat more seriously into the situation you're in, it is not all well at all. We have had, in many countries, to give just one example, fierce discussions on the programming and the setup of our research projects. And it started usually with a case somewhere in our own school or at our neighbor's school where fraud was taking place, where materials had been used in an improper manner or references were plagiarized or something like it. And then usually they said, well, we have to look into it. How do we educate ourselves as researchers? How do we educate young researchers? So they set up programs, and neighbors said, hey, gee, we better do that as well. The same thing is true in many countries where fairness and honesty in examining, in testing, in building the curriculum is a case. And I do a lot of university review work in all sorts of countries worldwide, and I see a contamination of the good example. So what I am hoping for is the contamination of the good example. You see your neighbors that apparently have no direct, urgent reason to look into your value base doing it and getting to very good results in terms of faculty coherence, community shared values, and so on and so on. And the others then follow that example. I mean, we love imitation in the world of higher education, so let's, for a change, make good use of that habit of imitating the good example of others. But there will always be cases where people say or think on a high moral ground, we are okay, we have no problem. Well, okay, we can't force them. This is a voluntary kind of thing.
I will try to answer a little bit to your question, even though it's not always easy, but I think it's important we do something. And of course, in dull times or in countries where there are not so many problems, there are still challenges. But then it's a question of really understanding what kind of challenges the sector has as a whole. And I think for all of us who are working with scholars at risk, we get information about challenges that we don't see everywhere, but in many places. And I think it's important that if you are in a place where you cannot do things, to know that there are other ways. And if you're in places where you feel you can do anything, that it's good to know that this is not the situation everywhere. And I think working at home and with your partners may help you also understand how you can discuss these topics. And I don't think there is like one answer, or that it's easy to name 5 values and then we just do it like this. And of course on Monday we were talking a lot about how to put words to things and how to discuss and at least lift the discussion up to a certain level. And sometimes it has to be done maybe more discreet. I know, for example, in one university they were very careful how they named their courses so that they shouldn't offend anyone. That was their way of finding a way away from censorship. I remember I was once visiting a university in another country and being with the leadership of the university, and then the students were actually rioting in the university, and I was trying to ask what was happening and so on, and they were like, oh, they're not troublemakers, and I was like, whoa. So I thought they were student activists. Of course, there are so many situations, and we don't all of us know all the situations. And one thing that I think is good about MOOC is that we hope that it will give us more information to improve the work that is done on a global basis, because we will hopefully get voices and comments and questions from many different settings, so that we can all learn more about the different settings. But I don't know, it's actually each university and maybe even smaller groups in the university need to discuss these things.
Yeah, excuse me. I think the question about dull times is a good one. I think part of the project is, our project is designed around the idea that it is really hard to mobilize support and interest around these issues until an incident arises. And so the point Marit made earlier about being proactive is a core part of this curriculum we've developed, because again, if you wait until that point, you're already behind the ball and it's going to be a lot harder to get to a positive result. And in terms of situations in conflict zones, and I think the project really aims to give universities a framework in which to discuss these issues. And again, the specific list of values that your university may identify as being core to their mission may vary or have a twist, but I think the central mission would be the same, in that we're arming, members of the higher education community with a framework to discuss these things. So when you're talking about security issues, that could fall under an access umbrella. When you're talking about, and the same would maybe go for gender. And so if you're looking for ways to raise these issues and have a dialogue on campus, if you can build a shared vocabulary around these terms and kind of point to the reason why they matter and what they do to help expand quality higher education, then I think the framework can be a helpful tool in that regard.
And I think this will sum up this session. I think, we have a survey, we have the education, and we have the framework. So we actually have, we have the pattern, we have the lot. So we're just hoping that you will walk out of this session filled with motivation to raise these questions within your institutions and find your ways in terms of tackling the value-based projects. So thank you very much.